be the article portion of our science for day 3. So what I'm going to do is read this for us, and then I'm going to draw emphasis to what kind of the key point of this entire science activity is. We're looking at earthquakes today, okay? So basically, this is just going to be an article about earthquakes, specifically in the UK. Now, the UK is the United Kingdom, which is part of Europe, okay? If we think about Great Britain, people where they have British accents, that might help you remember. That's kind of where this article was written and where this research was taken, all right? And it's going to lend itself to the activity because we're actually going to look at a map of parts of Europe and see where earthquakes have occurred, okay? And so we'll look at that in a moment, but let's go ahead and just start reading this, all right? So this report is from The Sun. That's a newspaper article. And the key title here was that tremor leaves Kent quaking, all right? So there was a 4.2 magnitude earthquake that strikes beneath Sandwich. So that's just a part of where we're going to be in the UK. So this is by Fred Nathan, and he reports that an earthquake measuring 4.2 on the Richter scale rocked Sandwich in Kent this morning, shaking homes and waking people up. The tremor struck just before 3 a.m., its epicenter around 9 miles beneath the historic coastal town. So the epicenter is what, is basically shaking underneath the ground. More than 800 reports were received by the British Geological Survey as stunned residents in nearby Margate, Ramsgate, and Canterbury felt the ground shake beneath their homes. Even people in Norwich, Norfolk, 100 miles away, reported tremors. Musician Jake Rest in Canterbury said, "It felt like a giant just bounced off my roof." And Lane Bunkeman in Ramsgate thought a bomb had gone off. He said, quote, "Lying in bed when the house suddenly shook. Thought something had collapsed outside, so I got up to check. Weird experience anyway." Another quote, "I actually thought it was an explosion of some sort and not an earthquake." Many Brits, that's another word for British people, took to social media to make light of the situation with humorous messages. Okay, so basically this is just a report of people talking about the experience they had with an earthquake. Okay. Kent police said they were bombarded with calls, but no injuries or structural damage had been reported. The European Mediterranean Seismic Meteorological Center, which monitors seismic activity, or I think it's seismic, guys. I'm sorry, seismic activity across the continent, also recorded the earthquake at the depth of 9.5 miles underground. Wow, that's really deep. One witness report on the center's website said the tremor had lasted between 2 and 5 seconds. Guys, tremor is another word for earthquake. Melissa Budge, a resuscitation worker at Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother Hospital in Margate, said, quote, "Me and the staff nurse both felt it whilst we were helping a patient back into bed. We both froze and looked at each other. Meanwhile, the patient had no idea what was going on around him. He didn't feel or hear anything. I thought a bomb was going off. Scary." Carol Gadd from Whitstable said, quote, "The floor shook and there was a loud tremor for about 3 seconds, although it seemed longer. Quite frightening. You don't expect this in Whitstable." Simon Moores of Westgate-on-Sea said, "Seagulls took the air and started making a noise. Dogs started barking. All the crockery started moving. It lasted for about 10 seconds. This is something I've never felt before. It illustrates that when something of this magnitude happens in the middle of the night, how vulnerable people are." And guys, the word vulnerable basically means kind of like how easily you could be impacted by something, right? So if you think about yourself being out in a storm without an umbrella, you're vulnerable to getting wet. That's kind of what that word means. Davy Galloway of the BGS said the quake was felt in 8.6 mile radius. So that means that everyone outside of the earthquake's epicenter, which is the biggest, the strongest point, they could feel the shaking, as far as 18, almost a little over 18 and a half miles outside. So that's how far that shake traveled the earth. Pretty crazy. They said, but it was heard over 50 miles away. So they felt it at 18.6, but then they could hear it over 50 miles away. Quote, we do not get massive quakes, but stresses on the rocks and plate movement still cause around 200 a year in the UK. It says 4.2 is quite significant for the UK, but it rises exponentially. In context, it is 260,000 times smaller than the recent one in Nepal. So basically, this is saying that typically the UK doesn't feel earthquakes. They have tremors, which are tinier earthquakes. But this one was a lot more significant and bigger than what they're used to. Okay, although it's still not big, it was bigger to them. Here in January, a 2.9 magnitude tremor hit Winchester and Hampshire, while in April 2007, there was a 4.3 magnitude quake 16 miles northeast in Folkestone. So this is from, again, a newspaper article. All right, so that's kind of like a cool way of reading about, oh, in real life, people have experienced this, and this is what they said about it. So take that in mind, and we're going to travel on to the activity.